Good morning. I'm going to do a brief tutorial on getting started for doing some fabric applique. And today I'm just going to talk about the templates from the pattern and how you can make them easier to use and how you actually use them when you're getting ready to cut out or get out your pieces for your applique project. Templates in the pattern obviously are going to be printed on the pattern paper. And what I like to do is either print them, a copy of them onto cardstock, or I just make a copy of the page of the templates, which you're allowed to do because it's for personal use in the pattern. And then I would glue that paper piece onto some cardstock and then cut it out. And I did that on this item right here. You can see this is from the pattern right here, and it's glued onto cardstock. That makes it more durable instead of just having it to be a thin piece of paper, and it's easier to trace around, especially when you have more than one piece that you're tracing off of this. So what you do is to use your template, is you place it on the fabric that was chosen for, and this is a flower, and then you're going to use what I like to use. It's called Soline. It is a chalk mechanical pencil. And it comes in different colors of chalk. They have white, yellow, green, pink, and each color of chalk is made for different colors of fabric. Obviously the green and yellow would show up better on darker fabric. The white shows up on darker fabric. And on lighter fabric, you can use the yellow and the green also. So I trace around my template, and as you can see, it is traced out here. And then what I want to do is I want to cut it out, kind of guessing. You don't have to have an exact 1/4 inch seam. I like to go between 1/4 to 1/8 of an inch, and the more experienced you get at applique, the closer you'll be able to cut. So what I do is I just take my fabric scissors, and I follow my outline about 1/4 to 1/8 of an inch outside, and I cut it. And then you have your flower piece. Now it's not exactly ready yet. Now you need to do clipping in the seam allowance, because that is going to help you turn the seam allowance fabric under for stitching. And you want to start on a kind of a straight area, but as you get to curves, you want to put more clips closer together up to the line, but you don't want to go over the line. And the reason why you want more clips closer together is because it'll help you shape that curve in the flower easier. Now you're here on the top of the flower, it's more of a straight line, so you don't need quite as many clips closer together. And then once you get to another curve, you're clipping closer together. And that's how you clip. So then when your applique is on the background, you'll see how these little clipped areas are easier to turn under than an entire straight line of fabric. Now, one little tip is if you have a smaller piece that goes completely on top of another piece, it is easier to applique this smaller piece to this bigger piece while it's not on the background. So what I would do is I would applique this little purple flower center onto this pink flower before I was going to place it on the background to stitch. And then that way you don't have to deal with the entire piece while you're stitching. And what I use to affix my appliques to either the larger piece or the background is Roxanne's Glue Based It. It is a fabric glue that is water soluble, and you only need to have a little dot of glue on the back to make it stick. And once you get that dot of glue sticking it. And then it sticks down. And you let it sit there for about 30 seconds. And then it'll hold. And then you can stitch around your applique. So that's it for now for my little mini tutorial. Next time I will go over making stems from strips of fabric, because on this project we're going to need to have some stems for the flowers to sit on. So I'll see you next time. Welcome to mini tutorial video number 2 for my applique series. This one is going to be about turning strips into stems for an applique project. You need to either use bias cut strips if you want your stems, or if your project has stems that curve, because those are easier to curve, or if your project has stems just for that go straight, then all you need to do is cut straight strips. So your pattern will usually tell you whether you need a straight strip or a bias strip. So the first tool that we need is a bias strip maker, and you can find these tools at fabric stores and places like Joann Fabrics. Your strip is usually going to be cut a 1/2 inch larger than the size of the stem, the width of the stem. So I want 1/4 inch stems for this project I'm working on. So the width of my strip is 3/4 of an inch. So if you wanted 1/2 inch stems, then your width of your strip would be 1 inch. So this is a called a 1/4 inch bias tool, because out this end, this is a 1/4 inch, and that's what the size of my strip will be. And what this tool does, it helps you fold over your ends so that you can iron them closed to make your stem. And you can make stems without a tool, but then you would have to physically keep bending over the sides as you ironed, and it's a little bit more difficult to do that than if you have the tool. So here you go. I'm going to feed the strip into the tool until you see it come out the other end, and you can already tell it's folded over if you look closely. So then what I do is I put my fingers here to flatten it out, and I take my iron and I press. And you don't want to move back and forth, because you'll end up stretching the strip, especially if it's a bias strip that can be stretched or kind of distorted more. So I'm going to keep going, and I just gently move my iron. I'm not moving it back and forth. I'm just gently moving my iron along as I am pulling the tool towards the end of the strip. And there you go. You have a 1/4 inch stem. Now, if you're making a lot of these and you're making a whole bunch of stems at once, if you don't want your ends to open up while you are working on one stem or other stems, and it makes it easier for it to lay flat on your project, I take my Roxanne's glue basted again, wonderful glue that I always have handy, and I will put a few little drops of glue inside the stem, and then you just kind of put it there and you press down. And then you don't have to put it all along, you just put it in a few places, and then that will keep your stem closed, and you could do it on both sides. And then that way, as you're stacking up your stems, they're not going to unfold from being ironed. So that is how you make a stem from a strip of fabric. Thank you, and join me again next time. Hi there. Welcome back to my applique series. Now that we have our stems made and cut down to the size that the pattern requests, and that we have our pieces cut out, it's time to lay out the design on the background. And what I do to start off is I take a ruler and I find the center of the design, and this is 24 inches, so I'm going to find 12 inches, and I just put a little mark, and then I do from this side, and it's about 8 inches wide, so I mark right there. So I know where my center is, and this will help me lay out my design. Now, the things that you stitch down first are normally going to be your stems, because on a project that has a floral design, usually the stems are on the bottom. However, generally you do start with whatever's on the bottom of the design. That's how you do your stitching order. So to get your stems laid out the way you want, what I like to do is start off with the longest stems that I know are going to be in the middle of the project, and then I just use the applique pieces that are going to be on the project over the stems, just to kind of give a guide of where I want these stems to be. It just kind of helps with the layout. So I do this like that, and if I want to make sure my stems are nice and straight, I can use my ruler, and I could do that as I lay them out. And then you can do your other stems, and these stems you want to just kind of tuck in from the middle stem, just to kind of get an idea of where you want them. You're going to be securing them a little bit later with the glue. Okay, so now I have the stems where I want them, and then I could just lay the flowers down. And I think I'll put this one over here because it'll give me a little variation. And I always lay down a flower or whatever goes on top of the stem a little bit overlapping the end of a stem, because then that way you're sure to cover up the raw edge of the stem. I always, in my patterns, tell you to cut a stem larger than you actually, or longer than you actually need, because then that way it gives you the option of having enough to cover up the raw edge. Now, if you want your design to stay within the background and not overlap onto any of the pieced area, you can go ahead and just move your flowers down a bit. And I'm not going to put the centers on because you're kind of getting an idea of where you want your stems. So now, if you like this layout and you think that it reflects how you want your top to look, you can go ahead and take a little bit of the Roxanne's glue and begin to just put little dots of glue on the top stem here, because then that will hold everything in place. And then you can remove all these other appliques and finish gluing down the stems to where you like, and then you're ready to stitch the stems down. So join me again on the next video and we'll go over the applique stitch. Welcome back to my applique series. Now that we have our stems placed on the project where we want them, I'm going to go ahead and show you the different tools I use to actually do the applique stitch. First thing I have is I like to use applique needles. My favorite applique needle is John James, and I like the size 9 needle because it's the right length for me. If the higher the number, the shorter the needle. So if you need to have a shorter needle or a longer needle, go ahead and pick out the size that is right for you. The thread I like to use is a 100% cotton but silk finish that glides easier through the fabric, and Mettler has a really good brand. They also have a lot of colors that will match closely as possible to your applique as you want. You also don't have to use colors, different colors to match. You can actually choose a neutral thread, which will also hide pretty well in your applique stitch. So it's all up to you whether you want to match colors or use a neutral. So I already have some thread loaded on this needle, and I chose to use the green thread. So now I'll show you the stitch. You're going to come up from underneath, and you're going to come up into the applique, but you're going to come right on the edge. As you can see, I'm coming up right on the edge. And you pull through. Now we don't need to worry about the raw edges down here because those are going to be covered by the medallion motif in the middle. But if you didn't have anything covering the bottom of the stems, then of course you would want to turn this under and applique it. But since we have a motif on there, we're not going to worry about that. So now you're going to go right down next to where you came up, but not in the applique that you're stitching. And then you can come up again just about 1/8 of an inch away, just nipping the edge of your stem. And as you can see, well, actually you can't see, you can't see the thread, because by going down right next to where you came up, right parallel, you're just creating a little dot of thread. So it pretty much disappears. So then we'll go ahead and do the next stitch. And so you can see how, as I go down next to the applique, and then I come up and I just nip the edge of the seam allowance, you can tell you can't see the stitching there. And we'll do another one. Now you want to keep the stitches about, no wider apart than 1/8 of an inch, because otherwise you will end up getting puckers in your applique where there's no stitching. And make sure you don't pull too tight on the thread as you are stitching to the background, because that can also cause puckers. So I continue to stitch, go down right there and up, just nipping the edge of the applique. And there you go. As you can see, the stitches are pretty well hidden by using this method and the silk finish thread. So thanks for joining me on this tutorial. Next time I will show you how to do points and inside corners. Welcome back to my applique series. This is the final installment, and I'm going to be showing you the stitching on a regular applique, and then I'm going to be showing you stitching on points and inside corners. And I already showed you how to stitch on some stems in an earlier video, so now here we go with, this is the flower center. I've already got it a little bit of glue holding it on to the flower. And when you start to applique, you want to start by turning under your seam allowance with the tip of the needle. That's why it's called needle turn. So you can see I turned it under. And you want to start on a fairly straight area. Obviously, if you're doing a circle, everything is curved. But if you're doing something like this oval or a star or something like that, you want to start on as straight of a piece as possible. So we come up from behind, just like with the stems, and I'm using a white thread, so hopefully it'll show up better for you. Then, as you go along, you're going to use the needle to turn under the next area of your applique, and this is where the clipping of the seam allowance comes in. So here you go. I'm going to go and I'm going to do my next stitch. I'm going down right next to stitch that I came up inside the applique, right next to it, but outside the applique, and then I'll come up again, and my needle is just nipping the edge of the seam allowance on the applique piece, and I pull it. And since it's white thread that I'm using, you can see the little tiny dot of the stitch there. But if I was using a neutral thread that was more, a little bit more darker, or a purple thread, then you wouldn't see that stitch. But that's kind of what you're going for, is a nice tiny little stitch. So then we'll just continue to move on. And as you go along, you can kind of see I'm getting to a more curvier part, and you can see I have more clips in my seam allowance as I'm getting to the curvier part. And now if you are going along and appliquing and you notice that you missed clipping something, or that you don't think your clip was, you had enough clips, you can go ahead and do another clip, and you can see how that helps shape the oval as I'm going around. I'm shaping the oval of the center of this flower. There's the next one, and see, I think on this one, I think I want another clip, so it helps me to shape more of an oval shape. So you can see that's how you do that as you go along. So that's doing a regular applique piece. So now I'm going to show you points and inside corners. So I've got this one already started. I'm using white thread again to kind of give you an idea. So let's get up here, and as you turn it under, you notice I have clipped at the point, right at the point of the star. So there's your point of your star, and I have a clip right there. So as I turn that around, you can see that the fabric goes kind of behind the point. So when we get up to that point, and I'm gonna just kind of stitch a little messily just so that I can get up there fast. So when I get to the point, I want to put a stitch right at the top, right on that point. So I come up there, so I'm right at that point. Now you flip your star over, and you take your needle, and you basically, first you work with the one piece of the fabric from the other side that was sticking out, and then you just gently with your needle, you shape the point of your star. And as you can see, I've shaped the point. I'm keep my thumbnail on there just to keep it all in place. And then what I do is I take another stitch right at that point, almost right next to where I came up the first time, to kind of keep things anchored. And so as you can see, I have a point. So now I can go down the other side. So I'm going to go ahead and swish this under, and I'm going to keep going down the other side. Now if you ever have little frays of fabric that come out from underneath where you're stitching, you can easily clip them off. If you have some little frays of fabric that stick up from a point, you can clip it off, and then you can use a little fray check. And I sometimes go back and I just tuck my seam allowance more. Now I'm coming up to the inside corner. So what I do here is I come to the inside corner, and once again I'm going to kind of stitch just really quick and messily just to get up to the corner. But what you're going to do, since this has kind of a raw edge that's still going to remain kind of raw, because one side of your seam allowance is going to go in this direction. So I go up to the end of the seam allowance, right to the side of the inside corner, and then I'm going to flip, and I'm going to turn this under going in this direction, and then I kind of sweep my needle just underneath, just to get all the stray little pieces of thread tucked under. And then I put another stitch on the other side of that inside angle so that I can start going up the other side. So now this is a spot where you are most likely to maybe have a little stray thread that'll pop out, because right there in that little part is a raw edge that is not going to be turned under, because that's just the way it is with your seams going at an angle like that. So this would be a point where if you see a little thread popping out, you could just kind of nip it off with the scissors and then put a little dot, very, very tiny dot of fray check there. So, but make sure to check the fray check on the fabric you're using to make sure it doesn't stain. So that's stitching inside and outside points and some regular stitching. So definitely, if you have any questions, mention them in the comments, but I hope you've enjoyed this applique series, and I'll see you soon.